let's take a look at what President Trump has to say about especially commercial thievery that's been taking place. So what he's referring to here are largely these mobs of people who go into, say, a retail establishment, working in concert. It's a gang, organized retail theft, I think is a technical name for it. And they go into these stores and they just walk out with armfuls or shopping cartfuls or rackfuls of clothes or whatever other items they're interested in. And they wipe these stores out to a large extent. And especially in the George Soros district attorney, prosecutor districts, nothing's done about this. They've basically decriminalized property theft crimes in those jurisdictions. It doesn't even bother arresting anybody or trying to stop them. And of course, just as you might imagine, just guts these retail districts. I mean, Target's just announced this week they're closing stores in many of these Soros prosecutor jurisdictions. Whole Target stores shutting down because they just can't afford to operate under these conditions, these lawless conditions. So that's what I believe Trump is addressing here. Very short clip. It's only about 30 seconds long. I'll go ahead and play it, and then we'll start to work our way through the actual legal dynamics of shooting looters.
I can't believe, these people are killing people when they go into the stores. You'll have 300 young people who are not looking for a good future walk into a store, big department store, and just pillage it. And if you happen to be there when they're there, they'll knock the hell out of you and kill you in some cases. And we will immediately stop all of the pillaging and theft. Very simply, if you rob a store, you can fully expect to be shot as you are leaving that store.
Okay, so first thing I should point out is that President Trump doesn't say if you are looting a store. He says if you are robbing a store. And robbing and looting are not the same things. Looting is generally defined criminally as a form of burglary. In fact, because Trump is from Florida, I'm going to use Florida statutes to illustrate these distinctions between looting, burglary, robbery, and then there's and theft, retail theft, what we normally think of as shoplifting, but of course being done on a massive organized scale. Now, we'll look at all those under Florida law. And I also want to point out that there's a temporal element here in Trump's statement. In fact, let me play the critical portion again so we catch that.
Immediately stop all of the pillaging and theft. Very simply, if you rob a store, you can fully expect to be shot as you are leaving that store.
Listen to that applause, huh? I imagine many people feel, certainly emotionally, like these gangs looting these retail establishments should be subject to deadly force as a consequence for their thieving conduct. But let's begin to work through some of what we're talking about. So shot means, of course, the use of, deadly defensive force. There are circumstances in which you are legally privileged to use deadly defensive force against another person, even if it means they lose their life. Florida, for example, has statutes for the use of deadly defensive force to defend against deadly force, unlawful deadly force harm, if you meet the proper conditions. So the relevant statute is Florida Statute 776012. The first paragraph is about non-deadly defensive force. The second paragraph is about deadly defensive force. And it says, see if I can make it a little even bigger here. A person is justified in using or threatening to use deadly force if he reasonably believes that using such force is necessary to prevent imminent death or great bodily harm to himself or another. All right, so you can use deadly defensive force to prevent a deadly force attack upon you, to neutralize a deadly force upon you or some other person. So a deadly force threat to an unlawful deadly force threat to a human can be lawfully neutralized with the use of deadly defensive force. Fair enough. But then the statute continues, or to prevent the imminent commission of a forcible felony. So it's not just that you're defending life against death that privileges you to use deadly defensive force. You can always also use deadly defensive force to prevent a forcible felony. Well, that's interesting. So it would be worth knowing what a forcible felony is then. And fortunately, Florida has a statute on that too. 77608, forcible felony means treason, murder, manslaughter, sexual battery, carjacking, home invasion, robbery, burglary, arson, kidnapping, aggravated assault, aggravated battery, aggravated stalking, aircraft piracy, unlawful throwing, placing, or discharging of a destructive device or bomb, and any other felony which involves the use or threat of physical force or violence against any individual. So when we look at the statute and consider it closely, it might have seemed before that you could use deadly force to stop a threat to persons, and then forcible felonies was like a category of crime that did not involve a threat to persons, right? A different bucket. But if you look at the actual enumerated list of forcible felonies, most of these inherently involve a threat to persons. They're not really property crimes. We list some here like robbery, burglary, arson. We may think of those as property crimes, right? You burglarize a home. You commit arson of a structure. But the reason they're forcible felonies in the way the law means here now is that there's an intrinsic threat to human life in the form of these felonies, these forcible felonies. There's force being threatened against persons. In the case of a burglary, for example, the implicit force against persons is, well, you're in a dwelling where other people reside, and you could well encounter those other people, and you would expect then violence to result, right? In the case of arson, people live in structures. So if you set fire to a structure, you're threatening fires run out of control. Indeed, that's what the arsonist is hoping for. So that's an implicit threat to the people inside the structure. And of course, fires jump from one structure to another if they're adjacent to each other. And if there's not people in this building, there's likely people in the next building. Kidnapping, obviously, assault and battery are crimes against people, stalking, aircraft piracy. What we're concerned about is the people in the aircraft. Some of these things involve highly defensible property crimes like carjacking, home invasion, robbery. What's really being protected there is not the car or the home, it's the people inside the car or the home. So again, it's really a personal crime. Murder, manslaughter, sexual battery, all personal crimes. And even the catch-all phrase at the end, which involves the use or threat of physical force or violence against any individual. So the catch-all at the end is, again, personal crime, right? Violence against an individual. So Trump in his video says robbery. He doesn't say looting, he says robbery. And robbery is one of these enumerated forcible felonies for which the use of deadly defensive force would be warranted under the Florida self-defense statute, right? Which is here. So you can use or threaten to use deadly force to prevent the imminent commission of a forcible felony, and robbery is a forcible felony. So Trump is saying, well, if you rob a store, we're going to shoot you. Unfortunately, he says we're going to shoot you on the way out. Arguably, that's no longer the imminent commission of a forcible felony. Imminent meaning it's immediately about to happen. Now, you might argue that in some respects, the robbery would said to be still in progress. So the robber, if he's charged with robbery, the duration of the robbery generally includes flight from the scene with the stolen property. So in terms of the robber's criminal liability, he's still in the commission of robbery when he's fleeing. But we have to be careful because technical terms of art often mean different things in different contexts. So is what the legislature here envisioning that as they're out of the store, they're running down the street, are they still in the commission of a robbery for use of force law purposes? Because that's a different circumstances than if they are in the midst of the robbery. And by the way, what is a robbery? Because most of these people that Trump was referring to more generally are not, in fact, robbing the store. They're stealing from the store, but robbery and thievery are not the same things.